Okay then, so we've given it a couple of minutes just to let a few stragglers coming in. If people are joining us through the session, then that's absolutely fine, of course, too. Just to give you a nice big warm welcome, really. So welcome to the session, and thanks very much for attending it. The session is entitled Keeping Up with the Joneses. Before I introduce our speakers, please ensure that you have your microphone muted and your cameras off. That'll just help with the bandwidth. If you wish to ask a question, please do type it into the chat function. Questions will be put forward at the end of the session by our chat manager, Harriet. If you experience any IT difficulties, please do just try leaving and rejoining. That seems to fit most things. Also, as a reminder, we are recording this session. So without further ado, I'm delighted to welcome Tyla Jasper, survey intern from Manchester Metropolitan University, Jared Carnie, Operations Manager from the National Technician Development Centre, together with Richard Cutting, Head of Technical Operations, Resources and Services at Sheffield Hallam University, for their session entitled Keeping Up with the Joneses. Jared, if you would like to share your screen, and I can introduce Richard. Over to you, Richard.
Thank you. So welcome everybody, and thank you for joining the session today. So the session is about sector benchmarking. That's the first thing to say, and I thought I would start by explaining what benchmarking is for those of you who are unsure, and just to make sure that we have a common and shared understanding of what sector benchmarking is. And then I'm going to look at, as we go through the data that Jared will present, we'll take a little look and try and focus on how that applies to technical services more specifically. So, without reading through this word for word, benchmarking is a defined means, a process of measuring product services against those both within the organization and other organizations for various purposes. You can see then how data of these type would be useful in terms of establishing metrics. It also provides us with the necessary insights to help understand how organizations compare to each other. And we're all familiar with these in life where we compare standards in the NHS and elsewhere. So benchmarking, we are all familiar with it. Organizations in the higher education sector do a lot of it. In terms of its application to technical services, I would describe it as patchy and piecemeal. And that is the purpose of this discussion today. So I think that for me, this is about how we can use benchmarking to continuously improve the business, and I will keep referring to it as a business. And I think for technical services, we are in the business of providing a range of services to our customers, whether that's staff, students, or members of the public that the university engage with. So we are in the business of service provision in technical services, and it's how we drive the improvement of those services. There are other benefits to this, and I'm going to touch on that in terms of the creation of compelling business cases and costing and so on. I think then what is important from a perspective of gathering these data, they are not just data that you sort of put in a filing cabinet. It offers an independent perspective about how well you're performing compared to other companies. And I keep using this more commercial language that's deliberate. It enables us to drill down into performance gaps, which is important, and identify areas for improvement. That can be either incremental, continuous type improvement, or more big bang, transformative improvement. And that's not really the topic of discussion today, but I'm happy to pick that up under Q&A if somebody wants to. It also enables us to develop a standardized, a dangerous word in technical services, perhaps harmonized is a more useful word, set of processes and metrics. It enables us to develop and embed a mindset and a culture of continuous improvement more widely, but also within technical services in this context. It also enables we as leaders and managers within technical services particularly, but I would include that at all levels actually, to clearly communicate and articulate what our expectations are in terms of performance, whether that's with our customers or within our staff groupings or to students, as I say, which are a subset of our customers. It also enables us to monitor performance on an ongoing basis and to manage change if and when change comes. I'm quite a fan of that the only constant is change, and change is always coming to the sector, and it always will. It's how we manage and inform that change, and in some instances drive that change. So I think the next slide is probably my final slide for now. We've sort of skipped on, why is it important to technical services? I think for all of the reasons on the previous slide, but in particular for technical services, is to develop resourcing models. And what I mean by that is a link between, to give an example, student numbers and student number growth and the number of technical staff. Without that model, there is a situation that develops where the cloth is getting spread thinner and thinner and thinner. Student numbers increase, activity increases, staff numbers stay constant or indeed reduce. And you will quickly, in that scenario, reach a situation where you're providing a worse service to your customers, and or you reach breaking strain within the team, and that's catastrophic for all concerned. NSS at that point is compromised, and everybody is most upset. So I think the other purpose I use these data for is to develop clear and compelling business cases. It's often difficult to get investment. It's difficult to get investment in all areas, not just in technical services. But when it comes to demonstrating what I would call a clear and compelling business case, i.e. there is data in that business case that says student numbers are growing, these number of technical staff are required to support this activity, here is what it will cost, here is what revenue it will generate. Those are the types of things that these data are useful for. Here is what Reading University do, Karen. Here is what ManMet do in this space. Is a conversation you can have with your chief operating officer when you're looking to try and grow against a backdrop of reducing student numbers, particularly is challenging overall, but we are growing STEM, so the call on technical staff is actually growing against what might be an overall reduction in undergraduate home students. So the other thing is establishing a business model for financial sustainability, which is important for all organizations, not just universities. From the context of FEIs, it is alignment of technical services with other areas of professional services. We use tools such as Tribal and other tools to measure performance indicators and key benchmarks within finance. We do it within the library, we do it, et cetera, et cetera. Why shouldn't we do it in technical services? It establishes a parity within professional services more widely. It also provides an element of inclusivity within decision making, because staff have an opportunity to contribute to the metrics, and then those metrics are used on the basis to which decisions are made. So we are actively contributing then to the decision making in the organization. And I think that's called out specifically in the later slides as an area that technical staff feel disengaged with. The other thing is it's a useful tool for articulating what technical staff actually do. Sorry, there's a typo there, two others in the organization, whether that's academic colleagues or professional services. I'm going to stop there because we are on a strict time limit, and skip us on, Jared, if that's okay.
Great, thanks, Richard. So what we're going to look at now is a sort of preliminary benchmarking project that was run earlier this year, and this was a collaborative project between the NTDC, MMU, Manchester Metropolitan University, the University of Reading, and Sheffield Hallam University. So a little bit later, I'll be showing you some of the data that's come out of that project. But first of all, I'm going to hand over to Tyla, who facilitated that survey, to let you know how the project developed. So over to you, Tyla.
Thank you. So yeah, I'm Tyla. I was the survey intern for, I think, about 3 months. On these slides, it'll be May, June, and July. So the first step of the process to this benchmarking project was sort of outlining key contacts of who we wanted to send the actual project to, so the survey. And this was over 150 higher educational institutions. And so most of these contacts were put in a spreadsheet, Excel spreadsheet, and indexed obviously alphabetically along with the role. So what I pretty much done was go through technician commitment plans, which was suggested by Natalie, and she so we pretty much went through the technician plans and looked for signatures, and the people that were signing off these technician plans, so these would be heads and directors and stuff like that, there'd be a key contact And then another person who works for the NTDC, Sarah, she would give us a spreadsheet. And this spreadsheet was, so this new spreadsheet was pretty much getting collaborated on with the old spreadsheet, because they have previous contacts from heated and NTDC members of, points of contact and stuff like that. So yeah, another thing, we intended for the survey audience to be technical heads and directors. This was pretty much because some of the information that we required from the questions on the survey, we thought would be a bit too difficult. So we thought that these points of contact would be easier to answer the survey, if that makes sense. Yeah, so the next one, this was a survey so this was pretty much like the sweet spot of the benchmarking project. This was something that we wanted to get like bang on right, as this would contain the link to the survey. So if we didn't explain stuff right before this survey link, then how were we going to know that people were going to open the survey link? So it was sort of the utmost importance that we did get this right. So within the survey comes, we just want to emphasize on things such as why we actually developed the survey, what we hope to achieve from obviously gaining the information about the survey, what respondents to the survey can gain, and then small stuff like estimated time completion, deadlines, links to other project staff, contact details. So if they had further questions, it would just email them the questions. And we developed this sort of campaign, the whole thing on Mailchimp, which is a pretty good sort of marketing service, email marketing service, which allows us to like view our mailing analytics, as well as like sort of mass send the actual survey out to, I think it was the 154 points of contact. So yeah. So this is just the actual final survey comms. I mean, this was something that we went over for like 2 weeks, I think, and it was just back and forth editing on Google Docs and stuff like that. So as you can see at the start, we've just sort of outlined who the survey was made by and like collaborating universities and commitments and stuff like that. And then the second paragraph is just explaining why we wanted to do it. And the third and fourth is just information about, obviously not to worry about partial responses because any data is going to be helpful, and deadlines and stuff like that. And then finally, the survey link to the actual survey at the bottom. So yeah, June was, other than developing the survey comms, June was the month that we spent actually developing the survey. So first of all, we wanted to deploy it on Google Forms. I've worked with Google Forms before, and when I proposed it to Jared and Natalie, and Richard and Karen, there was a familiar software that other people had used, so it wasn't something new. It wasn't something you had to sort of sign up to. It was sort of, you give what you get. And then the structure of the survey we wanted to give. So we wanted to focus on questions like respondents' roles in their institutions. So we wanted to learn not only about the institutions, but the technicians themselves. So we wanted to look for more quality instead of quantity, because I know quantity is something big, because we wouldn't be able to come back and do this survey if we've got like 4 responses, 5 responses. So we want to obviously focus on the survey comms, which would allow us to get more quantity of respondents, and then the actual survey, which we wanted quality responses from. So the structure of the survey, this was split into 3. So it was institutional-based questions, technician-based questions, student-based questions, and this pretty much just give the respondents an easier sort of route around the survey. So if they found like a question difficult, they could just come back to it and stuff like that. So the survey was a deadline of 2 weeks, because obviously this was something that was meant to take, I think it was 8 weeks, but we ran a bit over time, so it ended up taking about 11 or 12 weeks. And the survey took 15 minutes to complete. Taking 15 minutes to complete, we thought that was pretty standard. Anything over 20 minutes we didn't really want to do, in case people sort of thought, oh, there's no point in this, is going to take too long, we'll just leave it. And yeah, like I say, the survey was deployed on Google Forms, which allowed us to visualize the data in graphs quickly. And as mentioned previously, offers a familiar platform to both us and the respondents. So this is the some survey sample questions. So as you can see there on the left, this is more institutional based example questions. So what's the name of your institution, how many technicians are employed within your institution, how many academics are employed within the institution. And then the second image is just sort of a mix of institutional questions and technician questions. So for example, within your institution, is there a university policy / guideline that requires the inclusion of technical staff's salary within research grants and KE contracts? So this was something that, for example, that we wanted heads and directors to answer, because that question would be something difficult for just like a senior technician to answer, if that makes sense. Yeah, and the final process was, once a survey had rolled out, was promoting the survey through Mailchimp, sort of giving people like a nudge on like, oh, the survey's not closed, you've still got time to do it. And then the NTDC Twitter, which helped massively. I mean, I think on one of the days we jumped 7 more responses just from the NTDC actually tweeting that out. So it pushed the responses up and obviously give us the quality and quantitative data that we sort of required or wanted from the survey. The survey was closed after 16 days it was. And then in the survey, in the data collected, we looked for things such as Russell Group status, institutional focus, research income, locations of where the actual institutions are, just to see if this would sort of affect the data or see if there's any correlations that we can get. And then in total, we got 22 responses from 20 institutions. So obviously there's a bit of duplicated data with 2 of the institutions. So we just had to delete one of the responses, make sure that they're both the same. And then we were pretty much good to go to start collecting the data.
Great, thanks, Tyler. So as Tyler mentioned, the focus of this project was sort of looking from a management level for some initial benchmarking data. Hopefully some of you will have seen the recent benchmarking, the first benchmarking report we released from the NTDC technician survey. If you look at that, you'll see that that's looking at benchmarking sort of the makeup of the technical workforce, the sorts of things they're doing in their role and things like that, whereas this was more looking at the workforce from a management level. So I'm now just going to take us through some of the findings that we got out of the project to give you a sense of the sort of things that were captured. As we're going through these, I would be interested, do pop in the chat whether any of the data you think is interesting, whether you'd like to know more about it, or whether there's any follow-up questions that you think this data has raised that would be good to for us to investigate in further projects moving forward. So to begin with, at a basic level, we did ask about the number of technicians at the institutions that responded. I know from my experience of running the technician survey at different universities that even this can be a challenge for some universities to tie down exactly the number of technicians they do have. So as you can see, we collected responses from a wide range of sizes of universities. So the smallest had under 100 technical staff, but the largest had over 1,000 technical staff. And I'll also just mention, excuse me, on the data that I'm going to show you, you'll see a few different bars on each graph will be a different color, and these just represent the institutions that were driving the project. So Hallam, Reading, and MMU. So as well as the number of technicians, we also captured the number of academics employed at each institution. So the highest academic count response was over 15,000 from one institution, and the lowest academic count was 334. So something that we did notice was that institutions that belong to the Russell Group tended to have a higher number of academics within their institution. So alongside this, we also asked about how institutions counted, who counted as a member of technical staff. So again, from my experience of running the NTDC technician survey, there's often sort of grey area around whether IT staff and estate staff are included in technician figures. So we did ask people whether they included those members of technical staff from IT and estates in their figures for their totals of technical staff. And 10% of respondents said that they did include estates and IT staff in their total figures. Around a third said they were, just under a third said that they counted as an entirely separate population. And as you can see, the majority actually said that it wasn't really clearly defined. And that again matches up with my experience of running the technician survey, where it's a bit of a grey area. So we also recorded the number of undergraduate students at each institution. So again, you can see it's a wide range of different sized universities. So the highest was approximately 45,000 and the lowest was just over 10,000. And unsurprisingly, it was the organisation that had the highest number of undergraduate students that also had the highest number of academic staff employed at their institution. So the survey also asked around total research income from each of the organisations, and the highest research income response from the survey was £593 million, whilst the lowest research income was £360,000. It should be mentioned that the lowest research income was from a teaching intensive institution, so it makes sense that their focus was a bit different. And we know that because we did also ask around this. We asked whether the institutions were teaching intensive or research intensive specifically. And as you can see, it was roughly an even split between those that were primarily teaching intensive and primarily research intensive, but also around a third of respondents actually said that they were both. And unsurprisingly, it was the teaching intensive universities that tended to have the highest number of undergraduate students as well. So we also asked whether institutions recover technician time from grants, and 39% of respondents said that they do recover technician time from grants, while 26% said that they don't recover technician time. And interestingly, 35% of respondents said that they weren't sure whether they recover technician time from grants. The institutions that did recover technician time from grants also tended to be the institutions that actually had the highest overall number of technicians employed within the institutions. And these also tended to be research intensive institutions, which makes sense. So we also asked a question related to tackling a lack of diversity amongst technical workforces. As Arthur actually asked at the top of the session, the NTDC has released a report previously, which you can find on our website related to this. But beyond that, it's been documented across many institutions within the UK that the population of technical staff are not representative of the diversity of the UK. So a question was included asking whether institutions have any practices that are implemented which aims to tackle this lack of diversity. And the reason this question was included is that all the contributing partners, that is Hallam, Reading and MMU, do have specific practices implemented. So they were curious to see whether this was true across the board. And as you can see, 40% of respondents indicated that they don't have a practice in place to tackle a lack of diversity within their technical workforce. And interestingly, it was the institutions that tended to not have a practice in place also tended to be the institutions that had lower numbers of technical services within their organisation. So we also asked whether there was a university policy or guideline that requires the inclusion of technical staff salaries within research grants. And as you can see, 88% of respondents indicated that this policy was in place. So because we were looking at this from a management level, we were also interested to ask about how technical services tended to be structured at universities. So, is it by department? Is it by faculty? Is there a centralized single technical service? So the majority of responses we received indicated a departmental structure to technical services, and a single centralized technical service was actually the lowest selected option, with just 10% of respondents indicating that this was how their technical services were structured. So there's not really an overall pattern across all the responses that we saw, and something I think would be interesting to look at would be whether there's a correlation between the way technical services are set up and how recently they had a review of their technical services, and if when organizations do undergo reviews, whether there tends to be a direction that they do tend to go in. So we also asked whether there was a ceiling regarding technical role progression in your institution, and 50% of respondents said that yes, there was a ceiling. And interestingly, a further 25% said that there possibly maybe was a ceiling within their institution as well, which, as you can see, with 50 and 25, that is a vast majority of people suggesting that there is a ceiling within their institution. So along those lines, we asked whether it was possible to promote technical staff within their role at their institution, and if so, how does this occur? And something we saw in a lot of our answers was that while it's not impossible to promote technical staff within their role, it certainly is challenging and often quite unusual. A few institutions stated that it was only possible if a member of technical staff was actually specifically becoming a manager, for example, and a lot of institutions mentioned that the challenges tended to be very complicated, extensive grading review systems, or simply that there were no clear promotional routes within their institutions at all that were visible to technical staff. So again, related to this, we, as a follow-up, we asked how technical services are represented within the institution and whether they're included in decision-making structures. And again, a number of institutions said that their technical staff were represented on committees, and it was good to see that technical voices were being heard on committees, but this was often a single person who was a single voice on a committee. A number of institutions did indicate that they felt their technical services were totally overlooked and not represented adequately at a decision-making level, and in fact weren't really involved in the decision-making process at a management level, even when those decisions did impact technical staff. And so as a follow-on from that, we asked in a broader sense whether the contribution of technical staff across your university is understood well. And again, there was a common theme that we've heard, which I'm sure most people here have heard before, of technical staff being underappreciated, not well understood. Most respondents suggested that academic staff and or university management didn't seem to acknowledge the contributions of technical staff or didn't seem to understand the contributions that they made to a university. A few people did mention that the work of the technician commitment and the NTDC has seen some improvements in this area, but across the board, the responses we received to this question were still broadly quite negative, which I think shows there is a long way to go and a lot of work still to be done. And so with that in mind, I'm now going to hand back over to Richard to talk about where we can go from here. Richard, I think you might be on mute.
Sorry, I'm having trouble getting back to Zoom. So can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you fine.
Yeah, for some reason, Zoom is not behaving itself. Okay, I'm back in the room. So in terms of the next steps, I think the data that Jared has just presented is interesting. I think there are further lenses that can be applied to this, and there's more analysis that we can do on the data to try and extract other information from it. I'm quite interested in the way that the different aspects of this are somehow interrelated to each other. With the size of the university, the research portfolio, knowledge exchange portfolio, technical staff numbers, there are different elements of this that can be tied together to try and extract more from what is a reasonable data set, but it's I guess 22 responses from 20 HEs out of 150 plus. It's not necessarily representative, and I think there's probably more work we can do to strengthen and improve the data set itself. So with this in mind, I think what the next steps from my perspective are we need to keep this on the agenda to move it on. We can't just have this discussion and then all go away back to our lives and our host institutions and completely forget about this. I think there's an element of leadership required here, and by that I don't just mean those with leadership and management roles. I think that applies at all levels. Leadership is a strange term in a sense, and I think leadership can just be making sure that we have this discussion at local team meetings. From my perspective, it's making sure that I insert this into senior leaders discussions within the university, but also professional services leadership team discussions, and making sure that technical services have that voice, as it were. So I think this is about leadership at all levels, and I've bold and underlined all for that reason. So I'm using the word we, you will notice as well. This is not about me or you or individuals. This is we as a collective. We have to cooperate, communicate, and collaborate. And you can see from this short and discrete time-bound project that's being presented to you today, that's exactly what we've done. We have cooperated between institutions, we have communicated, and we are collaborating to produce this information. And we need to do much, much more of that as technical services as a whole. Technical leaders have definitely got a role to play in this. Those with director type positions in a university, and not everybody has them. I understand that we've organized as faculties or colleges or whatever it is, different structures. Perhaps we'll pick that up as part of a subsequent presentation as a follow-up, the way that technical services is structured at different institutions. And I think that the technical leaders, our role is to make sure that this is on the agenda as and when it needs to be, rather than banging on about it at every meeting. This needs to be targeted and measured. I think we all have to try and find some headroom to dedicate some time to this and I've said or not, because perhaps this isn't a useful use of time, and I'll leave that one hanging out there. I think there is some merit in doing this type of activity and working to develop metrics and benchmarks. But I am equally open to an alternate view that kind of says, actually, this isn't a useful use of our time. We have to demonstrate and articulate the benefits of benchmarking and what we can do with these data, both to our teams and to others within the university, if you like, both academic and professional services. We need to raise awareness of this, absolutely. And the idea that the fact that we are organizing and coordinating ourselves as technical services is an idea that originates from within the technical services community. This hasn't been imposed on us. Nobody has told us that thou shall benchmark now. This is something that we've recognized that we need to do from within. And it's something that we are grasping the nettle on and taking it forward. I've left other there as well, because there may well be other next steps, and I'm quite happy to take that on offline or in the chat. My final slide, I think, follows, and it's a quote from Mahatma Gandhi, and that all good thoughts, which we've presented a lot of good thoughts here, and ideas, mean nothing without action. So in a sense, I leave my presentation, or my part of this presentation, with a call to action. And that is a challenge, really, that we come to these sessions all too often, discuss it, agree it's a great idea, and then fail to translate that into action. And that's what's required in this context. Jared, I think I'm more or less at time. I think we've got 2 minutes left, so I will stop.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much to Richard, Jared and Tyla for that really informative and interesting session. That was absolutely brilliant. I've seen another question in the chat, but I'm going to hand over to Harriet to manage that chat. But I have a feeling, Harriet, you might be handing over to me for the first question.
I am, yeah. Thank you, Liam. So, yeah, you asked, why do you think there are still discrepancies in the way technicians are included in budgets?
Yeah, and I'm not necessarily sure I articulated the question very well in the chat, to be honest with you. One of the slides that really stuck out for me was when people are looking at funding and whether technicians are included or not in research budgets and that kind of stuff. You know, when I, in a previous role, I was looking at budgetary control for the University of Sheffield as well. And it was very, very often the case that, you know, I'd see these grants and there would be one that had the technical services stuff in there and then another one that didn't, even within the same university. So I just wondered if you guys had any thoughts or comments in regards to why there still are these discrepancies, and if that's related to anything, or if it is just still a bit of a hangover from the days of just a technician, you know, which kind of gets banded around, although I think we're knocking that one firmly on the head. I don't necessarily know who that question would be to, but potentially yourself, Richard. I don't know if that's something you might like to comment on.
So having worked at a teaching, a research-informed university, a research-informed teaching university now, and previously at a research-led university, then the answer is yes, I do understand why, and it's a lack of standardization. It's multifactorial. It's a lack of standardization, a lack of understanding on behalf of those proposing the grant and also those costing it from the finance perspective. There is also a perception that certain elements of technical support are captured anyway within the grant overhead. Other elements are not, and where does that sit? There is also a perception that funding bodies, depending on who it is and what is being proposed, let's say what science or what engineering in particular is being proposed, that a bid will look cost heavy if it includes additional technical staff salary. My experience of that is if the science or let's say the bid is good and sound and exciting, and then the Research Council will fund it anyway, regardless of whether it has technical staff time on it. That won't be what kills the bid. It will be something more fundamental about what's being proposed. So I think it's a misconception that's still out there, and I think it's improving. I don't want to leave it as totally negative, but it is improving. But there's a long way to go with this, working with the research councils and academic colleagues to get this across the line. Equally, as a final thought, when academics come to technical managers in particular and say, cost this, it's not that well costed, because we often, unless we include a whole salary and the on costs, then it's difficult to estimate a fraction. do we get that fraction right? And then there's some teaming and ladling to do. And it's, you know, I think we don't help ourselves in a sense. So as I say, it is genuinely multifactorial, and the only way to solve it is to work closely together with other colleagues. I think it's not fully solved, but it is improving.
Thanks, Richard. That's a really great answer. Really appreciate that.
Thank you, Richard. So the next question is from Arthur Nicholas, who asked, following on from national benchmarking, so this move on for you, Jared, would there be any value in developing or expanding the survey to compare against higher education institution sector against its global competitors? Arthur, if you'd like to unmute and expand a little bit further, you can do as well.
Yeah, Jared and Richard, etc. The reason underlying that question is it's not clear to me who's going to define best practice and performance expectations. Okay, you've done the benchmarking, and we have global competitors, so both from a national perspective and a global perspective. Who's going to define those expectations and best practice?
I can give an answer. International's more difficult.
Yeah, I understand.
I would say. Nice to see you, by the way, Arthur. Even if only in 2 dimensions. So it's not easy internationally. Nationally, I suggest a weighted average. So revenue somehow weighted against NSS for teaching and or some other research metric, average H index per academic, something like that. So a weighted metric of technical resource against operational surplus against NSS. You know, and it could be 1 times the other divided by the other, but we need to develop an index that weighs performance against cost. And performance for teaching would be student experience, broadly answered by the NSS, I would suggest, because it's sector-wide, against the cost of delivery. And in overall financial sustainability is a good measure as your operational surplus as a business before you invest it in your master plan, I would suggest.
Do you think going global is a step too far, Richard? And again, I appreciate it be very complicated.
I don't necessarily think it's a step too far, but if you look at the US, some of the big applied universities, for example, in the US, Caltech, have a totally different approach to this. There's significantly more associate professors who are they academic? Are they not? Well, they are, but they're not tenured academics, so it's unusual. And they have significantly more technical staff and much larger facilities, in my experience. So they get efficiencies that we're just not able to realize in the UK. So not impossible, but how would you bench? It's like comparing a dog to a horse or something. They're very, very different animals. So not impossible, but a tricky comparison, I would say, Arthur.
You might look at, I'm very careful not to be too parochial, but you might look at, say, the Commonwealth sector to see how the Commonwealth sector were operating.
It would be easier, and Canada is again North America and challenging. So within that there are challenges as well. It's the scale of the facilities of the North American universities that skew this, I think. But that's not to say they're not useful exemplars. And I would encourage anybody thinking of transforming their campus or the way that their taught portfolio ticks. To look at the large American universities, we've all seen charge different fees to us, but they've got 90,000 seater stadiums and Olympic swimming pools and different facilities altogether to the British universities.
Okay, cheers.
Fantastic. Okay, well, I think we could probably keep going with that conversation for a lot longer, but we are out of time, unfortunately. So it just up to me to say thanks very much to our speakers, and thanks for your questions as well, guys, and for being here today. If we could just pop the Padlet link in the chat section there, just a reminder that we are asking people to add their thoughts to the Padlet link, which is how can the NTDC further support you guys? And we'll now be moving on to discuss that in the final session. So thanks ever so much for attending today. Thanks to our speakers, and I hope to see you all soon. But for now, I'm going to bring this session to a close.